My nephew moved into my house 3 weeks after my wife's funeral, and I let him. That was my first mistake. My second was thinking he came because he cared. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio. I know how power works. I know how manipulation works. I taught entire units on it. I can trace the fall of dynasties, explain every psychological trick used to consolidate control, recite the warning signs of a con from memory. And somehow, I still didn't see it coming from a kid I helped raise. My wife, Diane, passed away in February from pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to gone. We didn't have children of our own, something we made peace with a long time ago. But her sister's son, my nephew, had been close to us since he was 12. His parents split up badly when he was young, and Diane and I stepped in. We took him to baseball games. We helped him with college applications. When he dropped out his second year, I drove 6 hours to bring him home and didn't lecture him once. His name is Craig. He's 34 now. Craig called me 2 days after the funeral. Said he was worried about me being alone in that big house. Said he'd been between jobs anyway and could he come stay for a bit just to help out. I told him, of course. Diane would have wanted that. The house is a 4-bedroom colonial in Worthington. We bought it in 1998 for $112,000, and it appraised last year at just under $480,000. I didn't think about the house when I said yes. I thought about how quiet the rooms were without her. Craig showed up with 2 suitcases and his girlfriend Paige. I hadn't known about Paige. She was pleasant enough, smiled a lot, called me Uncle Ray right away. Something about how quickly she said it made me feel like she'd been practicing. I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief does strange things to your judgment. The first month was fine, mostly. Craig helped with the yard. Paige cooked sometimes. They were quiet. I started to feel embarrassed that I'd been suspicious at all. Then in April, about 6 weeks in, Craig sat down with me at the kitchen table after dinner. He said he'd been thinking. Said the house was too big for one person, and that it would be a shame if something happened to me, a fall, a health scare, and there was no one legally able to help. He slid a piece of paper across the table, a power of attorney form, already printed, my name already typed in. He said it would just give him the authority to handle things if I became incapacitated. He said Diane would have wanted someone looking out for me. He used her name. That was calculated. I know that now. I looked at that paper for a long time. I told him I'd think about it. He nodded, like that was completely reasonable. But as I walked to my bedroom that night, I heard him in the kitchen, on the phone, his voice low. I couldn't make out every word. I heard the title, and I heard not yet, and I heard he will. I didn't sleep. The next morning I called my former colleague, a woman named Beverly who retired the year before me. Beverly's husband is a real estate attorney. I described what had happened, not mentioning Craig's name yet, just the situation. Beverly's husband said to me, very calmly, that a general power of attorney in the state of Ohio can include authority over real property, including the ability to transfer title. He told me I should not sign anything without independent legal counsel. He also told me something else that I wrote down, word for word. He said, if someone is already living in your home and pressing you to sign over financial authority before any incapacity exists, that's not estate planning, that's positioning. I thanked him and hung up. I sat with that word, positioning. I started paying attention differently after that. I noticed Craig had begun referring to the house in small, incremental ways as our place. Not dramatically, just casually. We should fix the gutter on our place before summer. I told my buddy he could come see our place. Small things. The kind of thing you might not notice if you weren't listening. Paige had started reorganizing the kitchen, moving things. She threw away a set of Diane's mixing bowls because she said they were cracked. I hadn't noticed they were cracked. I went to the trash, and they weren't cracked at all. Craig brought up the POA again 3 weeks later. This time he had a new version of the paper. He said a friend had looked it over, and this one was cleaner. I asked him who the friend was. He said a guy from his gym who does some legal work. I asked for the friend's full name and contact information so I could verify his license. Craig said it wasn't a big deal, he was just trying to help. I said, "Then you won't mind if I have my own attorney look at it first?" He smiled, said of course not. That smile didn't reach his eyes. I called a real estate attorney on my own the next morning. Her name is Patricia Walsh. I'm using her real name because she gave me permission to and because she deserves the credit. I drove to her office and brought both POA forms. She read them quietly for about 4 minutes, and then she looked up at me and said, "This second version gives the agent authority to convey, transfer, or encumber real property on your behalf without your additional consent." I asked what that meant in plain English. She said, "It means whoever you signed this over to could sell your house while you're still living in it, and you'd have no legal recourse once the transfer is complete." I sat there in her office, in a leather chair that was slightly too big for me, and I thought about Diane. I thought about how we refinished those hardwood floors ourselves the summer of 2003. How she cried when we finally got the master bathroom redone. How the back porch was where she used to grade papers and drink her coffee every single morning for 20 years. I thought about Craig at age 12, sitting in my car crying because his dad hadn't shown up to his first varsity game. And then I thought, I am not going to be angry right now. I am going to be smart. Patricia helped me do 3 things that afternoon. First, we filed to place the house in an irrevocable trust, with myself as the lifetime beneficiary, meaning I retain full rights to live there until I die or choose to sell. But the property itself cannot be transferred, encumbered, or seized without the trustee's authorization. Patricia is named co-trustee. Second, I had a new limited power of attorney drawn up. One that granted medical decision authority only, and only in the event of documented incapacity as verified by 2 independent physicians. Nothing financial, nothing related to property. Third, I opened a new checking account at a different bank and moved my savings. Craig had been occasionally asking about my finances in ways I'd started to find strange. How much was left on the mortgage, whether I had the account numbers organized somewhere, whether Diane had a life insurance policy. I did not tell Craig any of this. I went home that evening and I behaved exactly as I had before. We had dinner. I watched the news. Craig mentioned the POA again, almost casually, said we should probably get it sorted before summer, since he'd be traveling a bit for work. I said I was working on it. He nodded, satisfied. He thought my delays were confusion or grief or just old man slowness. He was wrong. What happened next came from a direction I hadn't anticipated. A man came to the door one Saturday morning in May. He introduced himself as a representative from a property management and acquisitions company. He said he'd been in contact with a member of my household regarding a potential off-market sale. He had a folder. In the folder was a preliminary offer letter, a property assessment, and a 1-page draft contract. At the bottom of the draft contract, in the signature line for the seller, someone had typed my name, and beside it, in the line for the seller's authorized representative, someone had typed Craig's name. I kept my face completely still. I told the man there must be some confusion, that no one in my household had the authority to discuss a sale on my behalf, and that I would need his company's contact information and the name of whoever reached out to them. He was apologetic. He genuinely hadn't known. He gave me his card and I thanked him. I walked back inside. Craig was in the living room watching television. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at him. He looked up and said, "Who was that?" I said. "Wrong house." I went to my room and called Patricia. Then I called Beverly's husband again. Then I called the non-emergency line for the Columbus Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit to ask about the proper process for documenting potential real estate fraud. They told me to keep records of everything and put me in contact with an investigator. Here is what I had documented at that point, the 2 POA forms. both brought by Craig and prepared by an unlicensed individual. The preliminary sale offer letter with Craig listed as my authorized representative without any legal authority to serve in that role. A written log I'd kept since April of every conversation in which Craig referenced the house, the property, or my finances. And 3 text messages Craig had sent me over the prior weeks pushing me to get the paperwork done before I had any medical reason to need it. The investigator I spoke with, a woman who was patient and thorough and clearly had seen versions of this before, told me what Craig had done constituted attempted fraudulent conveyance of real property. She used the word attempted because he had not yet succeeded in transferring anything, but contacting a buyer, representing himself as my authorized agent without legal standing, and presenting a draft contract under those false pretenses. That was enough. I want to pause here and say something to anyone who might be in a situation like mine. When someone uses your grief against you, when they move into your space and slowly start repositioning themselves as a decision maker in your life, the confusion you feel is not weakness. It's by design. These things work because they're done gradually, by someone you trust, using language that sounds like love. Craig never said anything outright. He never threatened me. He just kept the water warm and waited for me to stop noticing. But I was a history teacher for 30 years. I know what incrementalism looks like. The investigator advised me to let things continue normally for a short period while they gathered additional information. I agreed. It was the longest 3 weeks of my life. I kept making dinner. I kept watching the news. Craig kept waiting. In early June, I told Craig that I'd spoken with an attorney and was ready to handle the paperwork. I suggested we sit down the following Saturday. He agreed immediately, quickly, enthusiastically, and I saw the relief on his face that he didn't bother hiding. Paige made a special dinner that Friday night. She was in a good mood. On Saturday morning, 2 detectives and the investigator from the Financial Crimes Unit came to the house. I had already spoken with Patricia, who was present by phone. I opened the door and invited them in, and I called Craig down from upstairs. The expression on his face when he walked into the living room and saw 3 people he didn't know sitting on the couch. I won't pretend I felt nothing watching that. I felt a lot of things at once. Sadness, mostly. A little bit of something that felt like relief. Not satisfaction, not exactly. It was more like the moment you finally see something clearly after a very long time of not being able to. The detectives explained what they were there for. Craig looked at me. Not at them, at me. He said, "Uncle Ray." I said, "I know Craig." He was taken in for questioning that morning. He was not arrested on site, but there was a formal investigation opened. His attorney was a public defender. Over the following weeks, as the case developed, it became clear that the acquisition company had been contacted through a mutual acquaintance of Craig's who did real estate transactions, legally, mostly. But this particular situation was outside the lines. That contact also came in for questioning. Paige was gone within 48 hours of that Saturday morning. I don't know where she went. I didn't ask. Craig eventually accepted a plea agreement. The charges were reduced in exchange for full cooperation and restitution, which in this case meant signing a legal document formally acknowledging he had no claim, expressed or implied, to the property. He also received 3 years of probation and mandatory financial fraud counseling. He was not sentenced to prison time. I want to be honest, I didn't push for prison. I pushed for accountability and for a clear legal record that no one could dispute later. I still own the house. The trust is finalized. Patricia remains co-trustee. My new will, updated in July, reflects exactly what I want to happen to the property when I'm gone, and Craig is not in it. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. What I think about now, more than anything else, is Diane. I think about whether she would have seen it coming faster than I did. Probably yes. She was better at people than I ever was. I think she would have sat Craig down in the kitchen long before April and looked at him in that way she had. The way that made students confess to things they hadn't even done yet, and she would have said something that was both gentle and completely final. I like to think she was watching. I like to think she's the reason Beverly called me exactly when she did, just to check in. For no particular reason she could explain. I still have Diane's mixing bowls. I rescued them from the trash the same afternoon Paige threw them away. I washed them and put them back exactly where they were. The cracks, if there were any, were barely visible. The things worth keeping usually are. I still think about that kitchen table. The way Craig slid that paper across it like it was nothing, like 30 years of showing up for him. The baseball games, the college applications, the 6-hour drive to bring him home when he had nowhere else to go. Like all of that had been a transaction he was finally ready to collect on. The thing about what Craig did is that it didn't start with greed. It started with a calculation. He looked at a grieving 63-year-old man living alone in a house worth nearly $500,000, and he decided that was an opportunity. And the cruelest part is that he used the one thing I couldn't defend against, Diane's name. He said she would have wanted someone looking out for me. He knew I couldn't argue with her memory. He counted on that. But here's what he miscalculated. He assumed that grief makes you passive. That loss empties you out and leaves nothing behind but compliance. What he didn't understand, what people like him never understand, is that when you've lived an honest life for 6 decades, when you've spent your career teaching young people how to think clearly and act with integrity, you don't stop knowing right from wrong just because you're heartbroken. If anything, you know it more clearly. Diane's death didn't make me weak. It made me very, very careful about what I still had left to protect. I've thought a lot about what allowed me to catch this in time. Part of it was Beverly calling when she did, a small, ordinary thing that changed everything. Part of it was Patricia Walsh, who read those documents without flinching and told me the truth plainly, but mostly was something I've tried to live by my whole life. That doing the right thing and being shrewd about it are not opposites. Craig thought I was naive because I was kind to him. He confused decency for weakness, and that is a mistake people make when they themselves have no decency to speak of. What I want anyone who's been in my position to hear is this. You are allowed to be both loving and clear-eyed. You are allowed to grieve and still pay attention. Trusting people is not the problem. The problem is confusing loyalty with blindness. I loved Craig. I still, in some complicated way I can't fully explain, do. But love doesn't mean handing someone the keys to everything you built with another person over 40 years. Love doesn't require you to be a target. Craig made his choices. Every step of it, the forms, the phone calls, the buyer he brought to my door, was a choice he made with full awareness of what he was doing, and the consequence followed from that, directly and without drama. The way consequences usually do when the record is clear and the documentation is thorough. I didn't ruin Craig's life. Craig made a series of decisions, and those decisions had outcomes. That's not punishment. That's just the way the world actually works when someone is paying attention. I keep Diane's mixing bowls on the second shelf, left side, exactly where she always kept them. Some things you hold on to not because they're perfect, but because they're yours.